chaka, ooka, 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 chaka. Oh, sorry. I was just listening to some music. Welcome once again to Cinemaholics, the Major Motion Podcast, where we talk about the biggest and best films that are coming to theaters and streaming online. From the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm John Negroni. I'm the film editor for In Between Drafts. And from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he's a freelance film writer. It's the freakin' Will Ashton.
What up?
Will Ashton.
Or, you know what? I should have said, that happened. Or something along those lines.
Which has never happened in a Marvel movie. You know that?
Right. Like, well,
they've never done that thing?
Yeah, someone was joking about that recently. It was like, you know, so most people like joke that happens in a Marvel movie. I think one of the movies where it doesn't, or it actually does happen, but people don't criticize it for is Arrival. And you never hear anyone criticize Arrival for that. But like Marvel, everyone's always like, yeah, you know.
For me, I don't think of Marvel movies with that. I think of like the Minions movies. But not even because I don't think it happens in that necessarily. It happens in kids movies though. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people say that after they listen to Cinemaholics. The episode ends, and then we do our sign off, and then people are just sort of sitting there around the radio, you know, and their family, the whole family,
right?
Found family, and they're like
by the fireplace.
Well, that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is our review this week. Guardians of the Galaxy, third movie in a trilogy, 1200th movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Actually, it's the 32nd, which makes me a little sad because I liked how Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was the 31st. I thought 31 was a nice number for that. Now we're at 32. It's like my age. I don't like that.
Yeah.
But Guardians.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but it kind of feels like the end of an era, weirdly.
It does.
In the sense that...
I think I literally wrote that in my review. It's the end of an era.
Not the end of the era as far as the Guardians of the Galaxy are concerned, but like this feels like the last movie. Not in the sense like they're obviously going to have more movies after this, but like I feel like this is the last one I have any interest in at this point.
Yeah. A lot of people feel that way. You're not alone. I think the thing that has people sort of, you know, in their feelings about the Guardians of the Galaxy is the James Gunn stuff. So James Gunn directed all three of these movies, and we don't have to relitigate stuff we've already talked about. In this context, that would be James Gunn getting fired from Disney in, 2018, 2019, because a bunch of like far-right people, you know, dug up some old stuff that was already public knowledge about the guy. Disney freaked out and fired him because they thought that they thought that he was going to get canceled by Twitter or something. They just, you know, they forgot to, you know, the social media intern who would have told them no kind of was like off work or something that day. Who knows?
It was just a very reactionary sort of thing. And it obviously led to James Gunn going to Warner Brothers first with the Suicide Squad, then with Peacemaker, and now basically being one half of their Kevin Feige in an odd turn of events.
Yeah, he's sort of like a Kevin Feige, you know, Jeff Johns, Zack Snyder kind of figure for DC moving forward, which I'm sure we're going to have an interesting conversation about eventually, because it is fascinating to me how all that worked out in his favor, considering the fact that Suicide Squad didn't, you know, it did well with critics, but it was far from a hit. It didn't do as well as the first one, far from it. And part of that, people say, is because it was R-rated. But also, Peacemaker, though, was, I think, a bigger success. I think that it actually was popular. People watched it. And I just think that they are happy with the quality and think like, okay, if we give this guy more chances, like the box office will follow. It's an interesting risk calculation, especially because with these Guardians of the Galaxy movies, the guy took one of the most obscure, like no one really knew about this except for comic book nerds, properties, IPs. Guardians of the Galaxy, a comic book story or series of issues that have been going on since the 80s or 70s rather, and I think late 70s, early 80s if I'm not wrong. And 2014, I remember they announced this thing coming out in 2014. I think they announced it 2013, and we started seeing some of the promo artwork. The teaser dropped. I remember thinking this could be big because it just looks original. It's based on something, but it also kind of has like a flavor to it. It was like the first Marvel movie that came along that felt like not a Marvel movie, but to its benefit. And then after Guardians of the Galaxy came out, August 2014, huge hit, absolutely, did super, super well at the box office, and also broke through pop culture noise. It like became, a big brand thing. After that happened, the formula, right, around the comedy that they have in the movie, the sort of like the vibe of it, a lot of the art style, a lot of the like Pete found family stuff, that has sort of like permeated the Marvel universe in some key ways over the years. Not in all the movies, but like you don't see like a lot of Guardians influence in like Captain America Civil War, but you do see it in Thor Ragnarok, right? And pretty famously Thor Love and Thunder, which they thought like Thor Love and Thunder was going to be like the ultimate culmination, right? Of like, oh, the Guardians are in it for 10 minutes. We're hitting on those same themes. And Love and Thunder, I mean, I think it's safe to say kind of a disaster, I think, for Marvel.
Yeah. Well,
not as much as Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, but
yeah. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the reason why the Guardians of the Galaxy were in Thor: Love and Thunder is because initially when they were when they fired James Gunn and they were like, well, we need someone else to direct this third Guardians of the Galaxy movie, they looked at Taika Waititi and they were like, yes, well, he made Thor Ragnarok. I mean, he's probably the closest thing we got to a James Gunn at this point. And I think they're also teasing like Adam McKay. There were several other names that went around, but can you imagine, especially coming off of Thor Love and Thunder, what Taika Waititi's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 would have been? That would have been a nightmare.
Yeah. And I think it's clear. I mean, we don't have to relitigate Love and Thunder, which, you got to feel sorry for it in some way, because there's a movie that really just like tanked a lot of goodwill people had for Taika Waititi in sort of the comic book form. But I'm happy with the way things turned out, because I think he's better off not doing Marvel stuff anymore. And I actually, I feel the same way for James Gunn. We'll set up the movie and everything, but the first thing I want to say is I am very happy that he's going out with this movie. Like that after this, no more James Gunn in the MCU. Hopefully no more Guardians of the Galaxy movies. Leave it alone. I personally think this is a great trilogy on its own. Really good stuff. And I think it's a trilogy that I wish was more standalone. Like you could watch all three of these movies and enjoy them without having to have all the other context. I even put in my review like a bit of a, all right, here's what you need to, here's what you need to see, I guess, before in between the movies if you didn't already.
I mean, you definitely can watch the first two movies without having seen the other ones. I mean, you just might need to get someone whispering in your ear like, oh, Thanos is like this guy, so-and-so. But otherwise, they are very standalone. This one,
Thanos is introduced in the first Guardians movie, though. So, I mean, if anything, I think that it's more standalone than like Infinity War in a sense, because,
Sure. Technically, he's introduced in the Avengers.
He's introduced at the end of Avengers, but like you just see his face. There's no, he has like lines. He's actually like a character in the first Guardians movie.
Yeah, well, I think he does have some lines in the Avengers as well, but that's neither here nor there.
I just remember him smiling. Or in an Age of Ultron, he kind of is just like, I'll do it myself. But that's after Guardians.
Right, yeah, because there's that running joke I remember before Guardians and before Infinity War where Thanos would just be for like 3 or 4 movies just like in space in his little throne, just being like, oh, I'm going to get those Infinity Stones. And it's like, okay.
Those rotten Avengers. I'll get them.
Right. I'll get them eventually.
You'll see.
Yeah.
Not right now.
But I heard someone say that the biggest enemy of the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy is Avengers Infinity War, just because that kind of mixed things up. And I think even James Gunn has gone, he said it politely, but I think he's kind of gone on record being like, they made some decisions that personally I wasn't really fond of. Like he didn't love the direction I think they went in. And this movie kind of had to work around that a little bit in a way
he
that
has a whole scene in this where he's like super passive aggressive, I think, in the writing about what happens with Gamora. Like it's so obvious. Like Peter is sort of doing a soliloquy of like, all right, here's another explanation, because at that point they had already sort of said like, here's what happened to Gamora, but then he does it again, right? Because he's like, it's almost like Gunn is looking at the camera and being like, this is so stupid and complex and convoluted that I have to do it again, and I have to play it this way. And just this whole thing of him being like, I'm not an Infinity Stone scientist. I mean, it's It's the kind of petty stuff I like personally.
Yeah. And then Nebula gets to be pseudo Kevin Feige or something. So that's fun. But yeah.
As for the movie itself.
Yeah, I mean, this was probably the most excited I was, or at least this is the most I've wanted a Marvel movie to come to be with this director at the helm since probably Edgar Wright taking over Ant-Man. Because like you said, I mean...
You more than Wakanda Forever? That's the other one for me.
Well, no, what I meant was like there is a reality where James Gunn didn't get to finish his trilogy. We talked about already, and like there was a very real possibility, especially given his growing connection to the DC, that he wouldn't get to finish his trilogy. So I know that like when he finally got attached to again, whether that was like 2019 or whenever it was, yeah, it felt like a huge relief. Like, okay, they're gonna right the ship. They're gonna end this strong. It seemed uncertain that it was gonna be like this is gonna be, you know, a 2 out of 3 trilogy or whatever. So I was, you know, definitely relieved when that happened. But I feel like the buzz was sort of muted weirdly for this one going into it, and I was kind of curious if that was your case as well. I don't know if it was just because.
When you say buzz, what do you mean? Like social media buzz, or did you feel like you weren't seeing as many like advertising? Where I feel like I've seen lots of billboards.
Well, that's true.
You know, I'm not on social media as much as I used to be because I don't use Twitter as much. So I generally don't have that outlet.
I'm not talking social media, but I just mean like, I don't know, just I feel like in general, like there was a lot of hype for the first one. Because it was like, oh, it's going to be Marvel's Star Wars. Like they made no small point to be like, obviously they hired James Gunn to make it kind of more like prickly and irreverent than the Star Wars trilogy, but very much that was on their mind. And I think people really responded to that in a big way. Obviously it became like the big hit of summer 2024, even though it came out in August. Obviously there was a lot of hype going into Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. That was a big hit critically and financially. And then with this one, I feel like, I don't know, just it didn't have like the same anticipation. I don't know if it's because of the time gap or just because people were now getting like kind of, you know, waned off of the MCU. We've seen that with the box office where it's like, it's strong, but it's like definitely the lowest of their first weekend of May openers. It just seems like I think it will help because of the word of mouth that people are probably going to come and see this and be like, oh, this is like considered a good film. It's not like good by Marvel standards. It's like people are liking this as a film, and they'll remember how much they liked the previous Guardians movies. But yeah, I just feel like there's just not as much like anticipation, like even to the point where they were like hosting like nationwide free screenings like a week or so ago to kind of like drum up some of that buzz that I think they were kind of anticipating was going to come more naturally at that point. It just seemed like, I don't know, it just didn't seem like as organically hyped as the previous Guardians movies.
It hasn't been that long since Ant-Man and the Wasp came out. I think a lot of the Kang stuff has definitely soured people in terms of that movie. Obviously was not very successful, didn't make a lot of money, and Jonathan Majors, of course, who is just such a huge question mark for Marvel right now, a big pain point for them, because with the writer strike now too, they can't even like recast the guy and rewrite anything because the writers are on strike. So Marvel is kind of in a really bad position at the moment. And I think between that and Thor: Love and Thunder kind of underperforming, and I do wonder if they kind of felt like this movie sort of needed to be a big win for them. And I'm not sure what the marketing strategy was with it, if they were just going for quiet and steady, you know. That said, this movie's been a big box office hit so far. And I know for me, and obviously you, like, my anticipation for this has definitely been like cautiously optimistic, because I do think these movies have always kind of been their own thing. Like, they just don't feel as like attached symbiotically to like the whole Marvel saga machine. Like, I don't feel like I have to go watch this movie and absorb a marketing strategy for 4 more movies after this. I feel like I'm just watching this and it feels like a contained story that the director actually wants to tell for its own, you know, on its own terms, for its own benefit. And I think for me, I really like the first Guardians movie. It's one of my favorite Marvel movies. And it used to be, my number one. Like, I liked it better than all of the others. And I remember when we talked about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, I didn't go back and listen to that. I should have, our conversation about it. If I'm remembering correctly, I remember initially watching it, and I remember just not quite knowing how I felt, but in a good way with that movie. And I think I told you, like, when I rewatched it a while after that, that second Guardians movie just hits better and better the more I watch it. I think it's probably the most rewatchable Marvel movie there is, because the more you get it, the more layers you get out of it. And it's so deceptively simple. In fact, it's a movie that gets a really good payoff in this movie. Like, I feel like you need that second one a lot, because this third movie is all about Rocket, right? Not all about, but like majority of it is about Rocket. And there's little tiny cues. Like, if you've seen the movies a lot, you're rewarded for just all the payoff of like who Rocket is as a character, whose backstory has been kind of, danced around, glossed over, and I think teased, right, of like, well, something clearly happened to him that was very traumatic, maybe we'll get to it later. That's sort of been the Rocket MO. And then in this movie, if you know these movies really well, you see like such a clear idea that Gunn had. The only clear idea you see that he seems to be sort of improvising on the spot is the Gamora stuff, because originally Gamora was supposed to have more of like a conclusion in these movies, and I think that Gunn was robbed of his chance to do that kind of movie that he originally had planned. And so that's pretty transparent to me as like a downside in this movie. But we could go ahead and set it up, because I do want to hear your thoughts, obviously. And
I will specify with that as I did rewatch Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and the first one, and I also finally got around to the holiday special, which I hadn't watched when it came out, in preparation for this movie. And I knew that, like when you had rewatched it however many times, that you were really growing in appreciation. I know I liked it when I saw it, but I definitely feel like my praise was probably more muted for that second film than it is now, because especially on rewatch, like I had a similar reaction where I was just like, this is a top 3 Marvel movie, almost unquestionably. And that first Guardians movie is still good, but it's like this movie, he's maturing the characters. He's taking risks that Marvel, I feel like, otherwise wouldn't allow these characters take. It feels a lot more self-contained. Visually, it's a lot more inspired. There's just some like really stylistic choices made that I feel like MCU's lacked for most of their run. So yeah, I mean, it's just and also just emotionally, and in terms of the writing, it just has so many more cathartic moments, and so many more moments that just feel like, okay, like you're actually watching something from a filmmaker who's growing, not only in terms of their craft, but also like emotionally with these characters. And I think there has been that redemption arc. I mean, not to say that James Gunn was like an awful person or anything, but like I feel like he's really grown and matured as a person as these movies come along and as he's made them. And I think that's been discussed a lot when he got fired. But yeah, because like on paper, I was thinking about like, in a way, the Guardians movies shouldn't really work, just because like it's sort of taking like the Star Wars approach, but being like, what if everyone was also Han Solo, in the sense of like, what if Han Solo was like more Han Solo? What if Princess Leia had some Han Solo? What if Luke because like Peter Quill's
even
like
Chewbacca,
even
Groot in this.
Right, because like Peter Quill's obviously supposed to be like a mix of Han Solo and Luke Skywalker, but then like Rocket's supposed to be like the Han Solo, but then like he's like more Han Solo. Yeah, like you said, even Rocket, or sorry, even Groot is has some Han Solo in him. But yeah, but like
to me, it's more of just like they're all sort of like fans of Han. What if a bunch of fans of Han Solo or a bunch of fans of Star Wars suddenly were in a space comedy?
Right.
That's more how I look at it. And
certainly given the reverence and of pop culture that comes through those movies, I don't think that's incidental. And I like that the second movie even kind of comments on a way it's like Peter is kind of a lesser person because of his reverence to pop culture, and like the idea that he's like used pop culture to kind of mitigate the emotional trauma that he's had throughout the years is really fascinating. And I love that the movie explores that in that way. And I kind of wish this movie, I think it does to some extent, but I feel like lesser so than the second one. But yeah, I mean, but yeah, suffice it to say, like you said, there was a cautious sort of like anticipation for this movie, just because like it's been some time, like it's hard to know for sure if he's going to like land this properly. Like, like Return of the Jedi is the weakest of the original trilogy. It's like, it could easily fall flat on its own terms. Like, who's to say? But yeah, I mean, I think it was more similar to you, like, less like I think this is going to be bad, more like I just really hope this is not bad.
Yeah, in fact, an analogy I would like to use in terms of like comparing these three movies, and then we'll set it up. It's like, it reminds me a little bit of the Beatles' career. Those first few albums with the Beatles, like Hard Day's Night and all that, like that to me is the first Guardians movie. Like the Beatles weren't the first to do what they were doing, right? But they were the first to kind of like package it in a way that was like really enticing, that reached people who didn't even know they would be fans of that kind of music, right? And so you kind of have that first Guardians movie doing a similar thing, but with a movie that was kind of like making people feel nerdy in an interesting way. But then the second movie, Volume 2, is, to me, like, it's a lot like the Beatles sort of second wave, Rubber Soul, Sgt. Pepper, something that just feels more colorful, more vibrant and experimental, more hard feeling. And then the third movie to me it's Abbey Road. It's the White Album. It's like taking sort of everything they've learned and like kind of putting it together, right? And a lot of people could look at it and be like, me personally, I love Rubber Soul. I love Sgt. Pepper. I love Revolver. Like, those are my Beatles albums. But I also have a deep, deep fondness for the finality, of Abbey Road, the finality of that rooftop performance. And like, that to me is what this movie feels like. It doesn't feel like a greatest hits. Instead, it feels, I said this in my review, it's like a farewell tour, like a live recording of that, that's just sort of like, okay, here's some other emotional alleys for us to carve out. But look at what a long, strange journey it's been.
See, I thought you were going to end it with like, what if, for the third movie, what if those fans started taking acid and started seeing some really, really messed up stuff?
We even have that in the second movie, right? Where Rocket and Cracklin are in the ship, and they're all, Yondu, I should say. Their faces get all distorted and all that. There's some fun stuff there. Real quick, we'll say, so if you have not, so if you're going to listen to this review and you're like, all right, well, you already sort of teased, like, what do I have to watch, right, between Guardians Volume 2 and this movie? There's not a lot, like, for you to like be caught up. I think that the two Avengers Infinity War movies, I think you do need to see those. If you don't, it's going to be tougher to sort of like keep up with what's going on. So Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, I'm sorry, those are like 6 hours put together, I think. But then after that, the only other thing I think you need to watch is the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. It's only like an hour long, if that. It's like 45 minutes maybe. And that one's not super required. Like, it's just that it introduces a couple of things that are a given in this movie. And that might sort of like give you, some more context for, I didn't realize Mantis was, Peter Quill's sister, for example. That might come off as like, oh, did I miss that in Volume 2? It was one of those things that, like, I don't know why they didn't, reveal that in Volume 2. Maybe that's what Gunn was saving that kind of thing for. I think it's fine, though. The holiday special sort of about her trying to, like, tell him that that's the case, and like it's a way to sort of comfort him because he lost Gamora, which the Infinity War thing does. It also sort of sets up like why they have a headquarters on Nowhere. So Nowhere is like where this movie begins. It's one of the locations from the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. It's like the big head city, essentially. It was pretty much destroyed in Infinity War by Thanos, but then they rebuilt it, and that's where everybody hangs out now. Howard the Duck is there, Cosmo, Maria Bakalova voices him. It's all fun. For Thor: Love and Thunder, you're good. Like, you don't need to watch that. Like, I wrote in my I had like a little section of like, all right, here's what you need to, and I said, you could, if you're curious, like, why aren't they traveling with Thor anymore? Like, you just read the Wikipedia page. Like, it's simple. They did. They went on a few space adventures. Wasn't that interesting. Like, it really wasn't. And then eventually Thor just left, and then they were like, all right, we're gonna that's it.
Yeah, basically, they took him on a ship, and then they kind of got annoyed with him, and then they parted ways. And Peter Quill was also like, right. Peter Quill was kind of like, I'm still sad about Gamora, and then they kind of separated, and that's all you really need to know.
Right. So that's a good segue into the setup for this movie. So things have kind of hit like a status quo at their headquarters. At this point, the Guardians of the Galaxy, they're just sort of like, they come off as like pro bono mercenaries for hire, but like for good stuff, I guess. And they have like a new little society that they've been building up with like leftovers from the Ravagers and places where they've saved people in those Thor adventures. But that's not super important. The whole point is that a lot of them are sort of like, they're in like a weird limbo. Like Drax and Mantis and Nebula, they're good. They're just sort of like picking up the pieces of things, and like Nebula has sort of become like a de facto leader, a pretty functional part of this group at this point. She's sort of become in some ways the Gamora stand-in. But not necessarily like a love interest for anybody, which is I appreciated. And they even joke about it at one point in the movie, and I was happy they left it there. But yeah, as for Rocket and Peter, like they're sort of more the ones who are in a bit of a funk. There's a really great song cue at the beginning that I think is it's really nice, because if you remember the end of Volume 2, Peter gets a Zune. And so the Zune has like songs that aren't just in the 70s anymore, which I'm really, really happy that they let that they let this movie have like a more diverse soundtrack. And it was a big risk, because more choice means that there's more room for disappointment, right? Of like, sure, okay, you got to still pick stuff that fits this universe, but now you can pick, Creep from, from the 90s. You can pick a Florence and the Machine song for some reason. You could even pick the Mowgli's, which if I looked at it on paper, I would have been like, oh no, like that's bad. Like that's not going to work. But no, for me, the music works for sure. Sorry, did you have a comment about the music?
Well, no, I mean, obviously that kind of goes back into like Peter's growing and maturing. His tastes are expanding. Obviously, he's has the availability to kind of seek out more music in the way that like a lot of people do when they get older.
Exactly.
But yeah,
it's like graduating from the cassette tape, into the like going straight to an MP3 player. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, if you want to win me over as far as like soundtrack choices, you can certainly do worse than playing Radiohead. Though I will say, I think of all the Radiohead songs, Creep is the one I've kind of gotten a little tired of. But it's
at least they do the acoustic version, right? Sure. I would have preferred Nice Dream. I think that would have fit this pretty well.
Yeah, and you also get Bradley Cooper singing along with it. Reminds you of A Star Is Born a little.
A little bit. But yeah, no, so this movie centers around Rocket, because early on in the movie, Rocket gets injured after an attack from a character who is teased at the end of Volume 2. Adam Warlock, played by Will Poulter. He's sort of an artificial being created by the Sovereign Lady in that movie, played by Elizabeth Debicki. And there's this whole plot around like this character named the High Evolutionary. The actor who plays him, I'm probably going to butcher his name, but he's played by Chukwudi Iwuji. I don't know how to pronounce that correctly, but
he was in Peacemaker, right?
Yes, he was in Peacemaker. So was James Gunn's wife, who's also in this movie. And he is a theater actor. Like he did like Hamlet, and like pretty well known in that world. He was in the Underground Railroad, so a lot of people probably recognize him from that, the Barry Jenkins Amazon series.
Oh yeah.
Other than that, I'm not sure if I know him from anything else. He wasn't Designated Survivor, a popular show from a few years ago. And
boy,
yeah, he's also in When They See Us.
Right.
You're a fan of Designated Survivor?
No, I think that the fact that show exists, I think it's such a fun concept, but obviously I'm sure because it was on network TV, probably done in a mediocre fashion. No offense to network TV. But
sorry, I also forgot he was in John Wick Chapter 2 as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought I recognized him from that one because I recently rewatched it.
He's been around. Great role for him. Great sort of like, amplifying of his profile.
Yeah. I was going to say, but it's cool because, obviously we've been talking a lot about the Star Wars influence, but one thing I was surprised about with this one is that it kind of felt a little bit more Star Trek-y. And I feel like the idea, like you mentioned, of having a kind of more thespian Shakespearean actor as your kind of, grandiose, godlike villain obviously lends itself very well to like a Khan kind of figure, and in this movie, it's
interesting. I didn't even pick up on a Star Trek sort of thing, but that's a very interesting line of thought.
Like just the idea that like we kind of get more like space exploration, like visiting different worlds, and like they're kind of like, especially in this one, like you kind of see different worlds that are similar to Earth but not really, and it's like they have a lot of like more practical makeup effects, and I don't know. It's not. I know. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's not like a one-to-one comparison, obviously, and by no means am I a Star Trek expert. I just felt surprised that, like, and I kind of had a similar feeling with Quantumania, at least in the parts of Quantumania that I liked more. Than the others.
Yeah, I mean, it does kind of remind me of the video game series Mass Effect, which I know you wouldn't be aware of, but that was a game that, like, the first game did feel more Star Wars, and the second game felt way more Star Trek. So I kind of get what you're saying. It's because The first one has more of like the space action. It's a simpler plot. And then the second one is a little bit more of like philosophical about the universe that it lives in, and a lot of things have been expanded in a way that does feel kind of Trek. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay. All that said, the main thing here that's happening, like the main plot, is just that Rocket is injured. He has to be saved. And so they have to go on this like journey to try to find out how to cure him, because there's something wrong with him that's connected to his past. So over the course of this movie, while Peter, Nebula, and the gang, while they're trying to find out like, where he comes from or like what caused what happened to him, he's knocked out, but we're still hanging out with Rocket in a bit of like a backstory flashback series of scenes. So we see what happened to him, like where he comes from, why he's able to talk, where his intellect comes from, and all of that. And of course, it's tied to the high evolutionary character we mentioned. And it's sort of like it's essentially like a rescue mission, essentially, kind of movie.
Yeah, and obviously it's been said a bunch, but in case anyone doesn't know, if you're sensitive to animal torture or like animals in peril, just be warned that there's some gnarly stuff in this movie.
Yeah, and it goes pretty far too, and it's kind of brutal. This is a more grim movie, especially compared to the first. But it does feel like, in my opinion, it does feel like a natural progression from the first to the second movie to the third movie, in terms of like, it does get a little darker. Kind of similar to what you were saying about like the characters maturing. And, an F-bomb gets dropped at one point, which one of the first F-bombs, I think, in any Marvel movie, if at all. I don't know if any has ever.
Yeah, this is the first one. If you don't count Baby Groot saying the F word in the second movie.
Yeah. I do count that, so I guess this has to be the second. But you also kind of have a Paddington 2 attempt here. Some would argue if it's successful, where you sort of give all the side characters like one little goal or like one little like reference that like makes them feel part of like the movie without having like a full on arc. So like Drax, he's kind of just like sick of people thinking he's dumb, Mantis is sick of people thinking she's weak, and Nebula is kind of like this reluctant sort of like, what am I going to do with my life? It's not super elegant. I think if you could throw any major criticism at this movie, it is that like the side characters, they sort of have to share one driving motivation in a way that you don't have that same problem in Volume 2. It felt like Volume 2, everybody had their own zone and it weaved together a little bit more naturally. You could blame a lot of that on Gunn being a little bit handcuffed by some of these, movies that are interfering with, I think, what he would have liked to do. But I think he does fine with the character work here, especially because we know the character so well that me personally, I didn't feel like I needed to have like a full on sort of character arc for every character. I think that you have a pretty good one for Peter and a great one for Rocket here. So yeah, I like this movie a lot. I think, I really was looking at all the movies before this that have come out since Endgame, and this is easily my favorite out of all of them. Like, it's this one, and I know, and No Way Home is certainly up there, but I think this movie is definitely a cut above. It's the movie that I was wanting Wakanda Forever to be, a movie that just really like hits, right, and feels like it's got some urgency to it, but also some finality to it. I said like as soon at the end of the movie, I was like, oh, how great would it be if like the MCU just ended on this, no more. At least for a decade. How about that? Obviously not going to happen, but I think it would have been a great note to end the whole saga on, personally. But okay, Will Poulter Ashton, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this is like the last Marvel movie that I feel like any sort of attachment to, in any sense of like, well, like obviously these 5 or 6 movies have been bad, but there's Guardians. Like, just so long as they get Guardians right, I'll be fine. Like we were saying before, nervous, obviously, but hopeful. I trust in James Gunn. I figured, he wasn't going to let this fall apart if he could help it. And sure enough, yeah, I don't know where I'd rank it in the 3 films. Like, I don't know if it's my least favorite or second favorite, or I still think Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is probably the high point of this trilogy. But yeah, it does feel a lot more satisfying and conclusive than any Marvel movie today, even including Endgame. I think I would probably put it a little bit above it. And I would definitely agree with you that it has to be at least probably the best Marvel movie in a while, probably since Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, to be honest. But that's just because I didn't really have such a fond affection for No Way Home, as we've already litigated and relitigated on several episodes of this year's Cinemaholics podcast.
And I'm obviously the much bigger fan of like Endgame and Infinity War. Like I love those movies. I love rewatching them. So
sure, I definitely liked Endgame. I feel like Infinity War depleted for me a little bit upon rewatch, but that's
what's interesting about that too is that a lot of people would switch that around and say like, I like Infinity War, because I feel like you could just watch that movie and end it, and it's a more interesting ending compared to Endgame. But not that I agree. But.
It's shorter, and also like that the first half of Endgame is so kind of morose and bleak that I can see people not wanting to revisit that film for that reason. I think it's better for it, but that's understandable. But yeah, I mean, it's just so apparent that not to say that other filmmakers in the Marvel Cinematic Universe don't care about their characters, but they're just such a clear love and affection that James Gunn has for these characters, and his willingness to kind of push them and to explore this redemption arc that he's brought forward throughout these 3 films has been really, like you said, cathartic and moving in a way that I feel like we haven't really seen from a lot of comic book movies in a while, just because they feel sort of listless and endless. And this does have a nice, neat, like kind of conclusive feel to it in a way that I just feel like we haven't really gotten from a lot of superhero franchises up until this point. And so, yeah, I mean, it just works really well. I do agree with you that I think the rocket stuff is really where this movie excels. It's the riskiest, it's the most moving, and it's just, it's this really lovely little, like, but also obviously very sad and bleak flashbacks that also feature another really stellar voice performance from Bradley Cooper, as well as a few other voice actors who I don't know if I should reveal because I'm not quite sure it's supposed to be a surprise or not, but it's just really solid stuff. And I just love we talked about a little bit like his like trauma influence, I feel like has been kind of seen here and there, but I feel like this is really where he gets to like shine and be like really weird and wacky, especially with some of the side worlds and some of these like truly just bonkers character designs that he gets for, some of these mutated animals that are made by our main villain, who's just been tinkering with the perfect society for who knows how long, and makes them just really wild and wacky character designs that I don't know about you. Like I could definitely, a lot of people have been saying like kids are going to be traumatized by this movie or not. I don't know. I mean, that's not for me to decide, but just me watching, like seeing some of the weird characters that get introduced in this movie, I was just like laughing to myself and being like, man, it's so cool that they just let James Gunn just kind of like do his thing with this movie and show a sense of trust that they just don't really show a lot of their other directors. Like, obviously I feel like Marvel has been pretty known to be like hands-on with their productions, and this one feels a little bit more like, just do what you're gonna do, and just make sure it works at the end of the day. And he really takes that liberty and runs with it in some really wild and wacky ways. It's a PG-13 movie, not a PG movie. That's all I'll say for parents wondering. But yeah, it's a good conclusion to this trilogy, and that's really what I wanted at the end of the day, and I'm satisfied.
Yeah, it's like it would almost be in an alternate universe where, like, the Marvel Cinematic Universe since Volume 2, let's say, has been way more consistent. Let's just even say since Endgame. Like, man, if everything since then has just been like hitting really, really well, I would almost look at this movie and be like, that's fine. I would expect it a little bit better. But because it's not what we were given, it's almost sort of like, ooh, this is actually like, this is definitely like a different type of quality, and so there's another thing, I think there are like 2 elements of this movie that just don't quite work as elegantly, if only because they feel like holdovers from Volume 2 that Gunn had to put in because he couldn't finish the trilogy without them, and that's the Ravagers with Sylvester Stallone and the Sovereign characters. I really just, it's tough because like I want to get into spoilers on this, in fact. So why don't we just do that? Because I want to give some stuff away here. And so if you haven't seen the movie, this is your chance. And, considering how well it's doing at the box office, it's, certainly not an issue in terms of being successful. I think that it's going to be one of the better performing Marvel movies this quarter, this phase.
Yeah, it's hard to say, especially since I mean, it is doing well. It's like the second highest opening weekend for the year, but it is, like I said before, like it's definitely their weakest opening for this time slot to date. So I don't know if it's like doing amazing box office wise, but I do think this one has potential to have more legs than their other recent productions outside of No Way Home. So
I think so.
Yeah. But yeah, if anyone's, for some reason they're not sure if they're on the fence, if you like those first two movies, I think there's a good chance you're probably going to like this one as well. So feel free. I mean, don't be as discouraged by the recent trend of mediocre to bad Marvel movies. Check it out. I think it's worth seeing on the big screen. It's worth seeing with a crowd. Then I think that's a good place to shift over into spoilers.
Yeah. And I don't have a lot to say. Before we do the Rotten Tomatoes thing, it's just they needed. The biggest mistake I think this movie makes is I love the way it ends. First of all, I love that it ends with the Guardians disbanding. Going off to do their own thing, Rocket becoming the leader. It's a great payoff to Volume 2. And him sort of like taking charge of that and be able to do what he wasn't able to, saving people he wasn't able to save, and also, I think like Mantis going off on her own made tons of sense. Drax, of course, being a dad again, and Peter going back to Earth finally. And like that needed a little bit better setup. The setup really is just Mantis like chewing him out like real quick in one scene, and then at the very end of the movie it gets brought up. It's like, okay, sure. Michael Poulter's character, when Elizabeth Debicki's character, his like sovereign mother or whatever, when she died.
Will Porter?
Porter? I thought it was Poulter.
Oh, well, you said Michael.
Will Poulter, excuse me.
Yeah.
When the mother character died, I was like, okay, here we go. Like this, I think his character needed to die too. Him sort of having like a redemption thing and like being part of the gang at the end, I thought was dumb. I did not like it at all because I think that character too is so superfluous, really adds nothing. I felt nothing when he saved Peter in the galaxy moment, and it's so much worse than, like, to me, that sacrifice in Volume 2 is such a high bar, and I don't think this movie has that moment. Like, it doesn't have to be the same exact moment, obviously, but it just doesn't have the same like hit, right?
I was with you until one scene. Yeah, because like initially when like they kept bringing him back, they kept having his character like, oh, he's dead now finally, and it's like, oh, he's back somehow, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah. Like even to the point where I was kind of waiting for Rocket to be like, how are you still alive or something, like commenting on it more directly. But I was with it until we got to that one moment where I forget who it is exactly, but it's like everyone deserves a second chance. It was Groot that says that, and it felt like, I don't know, maybe if all the stuff that happened with James Gunn and I hadn't rewatched the trilogy, maybe I would have been like, yeah, whatever, kind of a little on the nose, but fine. But just like considering that what's been going on, and that's been such the like focus of this trilogy, either intentionally or not, the idea of like finding redemption, kind of finding the people that will accept you and allow you
James
to grow.
Gunn felt frozen out there, and then he was brought back by the fans, the fans that pushed him out.
I don't know. It felt more emotionally rewarding to me, I guess, given everything that's kind of going on. Maybe that's just more like the behind the scenes stuff infusing itself into the film, but I don't know, because of that little moment, it felt moving to me. Like it felt like a very touching, like that was his way of like kind of like turning to the camera and being like, thank you for allowing me to have this, like he kind of like allowed himself to be able to do this. So it's like that's just so like, it's like the idea of like them making this little like plan in the world. Like they take all these people that like been rejects and wondrous nefarious people and just allowing them to kind of like have a second chance and to thrive, unless your ego the planet then you don't get one. But you
don't get a second chance. He had millions of chances, right? That's an interesting read. I bet that's something that I would probably appreciate more on a rewatch, to be fair.
So yeah, if it wasn't for that, I would have been like, yeah, why do we need this guy? What's his deal?
Who's the guy? And I think also, I think also with this movie, the Ravager stuff, like I do really like that just Gamora does not end up with them. That they didn't try to do like a thing where Peter and Gamora, have another love story, or I like that Gunn was adaptable with this. I think that was always the plan, right? But instead of, following that arc and shoehorning it, I think he did make the right call here, because he kind of takes this as an opportunity to recontextualize the Gamora character and tell a story about like what it's like breaking up with someone. And it's like, what if you break up with someone or lose somebody and they're still sort of there staring you in the face? And it's a really nice sort of metaphor there where like Peter is like, he wasn't able to process or grieve, you know, what happened. And then here he is like seeing the person there, and you know, it is kind of like a breakup where you're like, that person is still like alive somehow, and you aren't able to like, they're not the person that you were in love with. Right. So like you kind of have to cut that, and like you can still be friends, but like you just can't expect the love story to last forever. I thought that was one of the best parts of the movie, and I think that that was something where like the Peter stuff really worked for me, because he's so desperate not to lose someone else, and that was so strong with him and Rocket, especially the progression of their friendship over the course of these movies. So I did like that a lot.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it felt like a lot more, like you were saying, like a more mature evolution for the character in a way that like I wasn't even kind of expecting that, and to allow the characters to have that sort of, you know, more honest, kind of more heartfelt, but like, you know, very explorative and sincere resolution. It felt earned, and it felt, you know, moving. It was nice.
The party has to end, you know, and it's like all good things must come to an end kind of mentality, but that doesn't mean that more good things can't happen. It's just that you have to be ready for, you know, the next phase to be good in its own way. And I think that that's another metatextual thing for Gunn to be like, all right, you know, I'm done with this. I'm done with these movies, but like, you can still have great things. Just sign up for Warner Brothers, you know, HBO Max, now called Max.
Max, yeah, and, yeah. Just be sure to join Max and give them the credit card information.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm happy with how this movie turned out. We didn't talk too much about the High Evolutionary as a villain. I thought this was a good villain. And the reason I thought that he was a good villain, he's very basic. He's not the most interestingly like written character, but he is just a jerk. Like, he's just a bad guy. He's not sympathetic. He's just evil. And I think that he's kind of like a combination of the Destroyer guy in the first movie and Ego. You know, Ego is kind of a character who there's all this baggage, emotional baggage with, right? And you kind of have that as like he's Rocket's, essentially like he's the reason Rocket exists, but he's also like the pain point for Rocket. And then also in the first movie, you know, the Destroyer dude, he was an uncomplicated bad guy. He was just evil. That wasn't the point of that movie. In this movie, I think that there's a nice balance of like, let's just let him be evil. He doesn't have to be another Thanos. He doesn't have to have like motivations. You're like, he has a point. Instead, it's just like, he doesn't have a point. He sucks. Get rid of him. Like, let's stop this madness. But he does kind of come off as like this all powerful thing. And I think that was something that you did have with Ego as well. But here it somehow felt bigger to me, because he, you know, we find out he has so much of an extension in the rest of the universe, in terms of like, he's just been causing pain for so many creatures, and his like disregard for life is just so palpable that it's the most satisfying thing when he gets his comeuppance. And so I thought that the way they handled that stuff was great. And I think the actor who performed him did a really good job. I mean, he's unhinged, and he plays it without it, like, it doesn't break for a ton of jokes in that sense. I think they actually did use his time wisely to not, you know, use comic relief for his villainy, and instead we're like, nah, he's bad news. Like, no time to joke around now. And there's a few jokes, but you know, it's not bad. You disagree?
No, I like the villain. And I agree with you that like, I think the franchise has been pretty good about like, the villains aren't as, with the exception maybe of Ego, like aren't really as jokey, aren't really as like, you know, like performative as the Guardians. Like they have their very clear objectives, and they're just trying to do them. But I will say, I mean, I really liked the character for like the first 2/3. I feel like by the third act, he kind of got a little too basic for me. He was just like constantly just yelling.
I'm glad you brought that up. There is another issue I have with the movie that kind of keeps it from true greatness. And that's, I think the third act is too boom, boom, boom. Like I was getting lost.
It's busy.
It's stretched. And I was like, what's
busy.
Happening?
Yeah, the third act gets busy. It's where it gets a little messy too, just trying to like tie all these different things. It's understandable, because it's like, not only is this like the end of the story, it's the end of a trilogy, and it's like, it doesn't handle that quite as gracefully, but it's understandable.
You kind of had the same problem in Volume 2. Like, it's kind of a busy finale, but it's not as long. So it's not as like, I don't know. It didn't feel as crazy to me. Another thing I really like about this movie, I tweeted this and people thought I was joking, but it's just nice to have a Marvel movie where like characters are in settings and like interacting with things, and like you have scenes where things are kind of interesting, like the whole thing where they go to like the membrane planet, this like living organism. It's just fun, and they're doing stuff, and there's jokes with like props, and like it just feels like so many of the Marvel movies lately have been like, and then they're in this hollow green screen area and they're talking about a MacGuffin. It's just like rampant through these movies.
Yeah.
And it just feels like there isn't that punching up of like, hey, let's add something to the scene to like just really like get people immersed. You just get that feeling that like that's something that Gunn, I think, excels at in all of his work. He just knows how to amp up a scene to make it more memorable and compelling.
It also helps that like the special effects seem to be a lot more polished and clear and well done, this movie, in a way that like we've talked about before. But I feel like other Marvel movies have been kind of more like they have to constantly like shift, or like they're under pressure to like force these like animators to kind of like change on a whim and be like, oh, we're actually going to do this and we're going to do this. And not to say that didn't happen with this movie. I don't really know, but it feels more like James Gunn had a stronger directorial control and was like, this is what the movie I want to make, and like was able to kind of like finalize that earlier to allow like the CG artists. Obviously with a character like Rocket and character like Groot, you kind of need that because like like they're interacting and they need to look real and they need to look like fleshed out and stuff. But yeah, it just felt like the world itself even just felt a lot crisper. Like the effects looked a lot more finished,
more seamless between the practical effects and the CGI for sure. So
I think that's a credit to probably Gunn, just because he was probably a stronger, more concise director and was able to kind of finalize that stuff. And like I said,
I think he's naturally gotten better over the years. So has I think Henry Brand, the cinematographer, who did the last Guardians movie, and I mean, look how far that dude's come since Legend of Tarzan.
Sure. And I mean, like I said, man, that probably is a credit also the fact that Kevin Feige was not like, constantly making changes and stuff. So far as I know, it's just kind of like, just let James Gunn do his thing. Just make sure it ends strong. So that was definitely definitely a high point for me for this movie.
Anything else you wanted to touch on? I mean, there were the cameos, but we are in a spoiler territory, but I just think the cameos are fun. I like seeing Nathan Fillion. It's just a nice cavalcade of references. Linda Cardellini.
I was going to say Linda
another
Cardellini
Marvel role for her.
I mean, I thought her voice performance was so central to the emotionality of the film, and I thought she did a really stellar job. I'm not as familiar with the other two voice actor for Floor and for Tease. I was trying to figure out who they were. I forgot to look it up.
Pete Davidson voiced Flecktick. One of the other creations, I think it was one of the creations on Counter Earth, I want to say.
I'm not sure, but I just the voice actors for Floor and for Tease, I thought they also did great jobs.
Yeah. It's a good movie. We can leave it there and do the Rotten Tomatoes game if you want. Let's do it.
Sure, yeah. I mean, well,
you wanted to talk about Bradley Cooper, didn't you?
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's too much more to say about that. I just like...
no, because you were like kind of curious if there was something going on behind the scenes, because he's not in a lot of scenes with the other Guardians.
Well, not scenes, but like I feel like there is...
this cryptically.
No, I feel like it's interesting that like, like when you see all the cast members like promoting the movie, you never see Bradley Cooper outside of like the red carpet. Yeah. Like I just kind of find it interesting. I don't know if it's more of like a contractual thing where like when they signed him on, he was coming off of like the heat of like Silver Lining Playbook and eventually like, like American Sniper and stuff. And it was just kind of like, they were able to get him because like they made in the contract, like you don't have to do promotional and stuff. Just make sure you do the voice work and do it well. And he just like kind of just does his thing and doesn't really bother with it. Or if there's like maybe potentially some like, I don't know, like some distance between the other cast. It's just interesting to me. Like Rocket as a character is obviously so crucial and central to these movies and to the Guardians of the Galaxy, but like you just never see Bradley Cooper talking about them much or like interacting with like James Gunn, or
I don't know if he's ever been to any of the junkets.
Right, that's what I mean. Like he doesn't have to do any of the junkets, so it's a little interesting. I don't know what's up with that.
I've never thought much of it. Sometimes I think this happens more often than we notice with some actors. Just sort of having a bit of a distance for whatever reason, and for me, it's like I didn't notice because I was too busy minding my own business. I'm just kidding. But okay, I'm sure there's going to be much more for me to say about this movie when I rewatch it. I'll end with that because this was definitely the first time since Avengers Endgame that I felt like I do want to see this again in theaters for sure. I felt that way with No Way Home, but not as strongly. Not as like I wanted to see this the next day because I was like, I feel like there's even more going on here that I'm missing. You know, so.
Oh, before I forget, Teese was, I'm going to probably butcher his name, Azam Chandri. And then Floor was Mikola Hoover. I'm not familiar with them, at least by name, but I wanted to give them more proper credit since they complimented their work.
Nice. All right.
Also, let's kind of address the elephant in the room. Are we going to be reviewing the other Marvel movies from here on out?
I mean, I was going to. You don't have to if you don't want.
I don't know. I just like,
guess. Like, what?
No, I mean, I'm not going to be like, I'm not going to be a dick about it. But I'm just kind of like. I mean, I don't know. Like, I see the trailer for the Marvels. I'm like, do we have to do this?
You don't have to be on that episode, Will Ashton. I'll invite somebody.
I mean, I'm not going to be a stickler about it. Like, I don't know. I just feel like if there's something else that weekend, like, can we just do that?
Yeah,
instead?
you and I could talk about. We could talk about Blackbeard. I don't know. That's November. Marvels comes out, right? Yeah, you and I. We can have our own little sesh. We can talk about some random movie, and that's probably much better. And then I'll invite a special guest to talk about the Marvels. We'll do whatever you want.
All right. Well. We'll play it by ear, but I'm just kind of like, I don't know, man. Like,
don't watch. That's the thing. I was like, don't watch a movie that you know is just going to bring it down. You know, there's no point.
I mean, the trailer for the Marvels looked a little bit more fun than I was anticipating. Like the idea that
you literally told me like the Marvels. Who cares after you watch the trailer?
That is true. Yeah, but I mean, I didn't realize the concept was them like switching. Like they involuntarily have to like switch.
Oh, I didn't know that. You spoiled it for me.
Well, that's the plot of the movie. Trailer. Okay, well, sorry.
I mean, I didn't want to know the plot of the movie.
All right. Well, anyway, we'll have that conversation more in depth later, I guess.
Let's play the Rotten Tomatoes game before you tell me what happens in the end. All right, so we have 308 reviews counted. Definitely pretty high. Everybody has an opinion, critic-wise. But yeah, what do you think? Where do you think the critic score is at this point on Rotten Tomatoes?
So the vibe I'm getting is like people. Critics, at least, I think, are responding to the film. I think critically, the reception has probably been a little bit more muted than the previous two Guardians movies, just because of like it's a little longer. There's a lot of animal torture and just it's a bleaker film. And also, I think some other people are even potentially maybe even more Marvel fatigued than I am, which is saying something. So I'm gonna say it's in the 80s. Like I think it's like 85. I'm pretty sure the first two Marvel movies are in the 90s. I think this one's a little bit down, but still obviously probably fresh, probably certified fresh, but I'm going to say 85.
So it's lower than that. It is still in the 80s though. I'll give you one more chance. So between 80 and 84, which do you think?
Is it 82?
Close. It's 81% right now.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, I agree with you that I think that a lot of that probably has to do with people just being like, not another. It has lost that freshness for, I think, a lot of critics. And you have the normal critics, not normal, but like the critics who consistently don't like these movies, like, your Richard Brody's, like, of course he's going to, but whatever. Now, funny enough, the first Guardians movie, you were right, was in the 90s. It's 92%. But the second one is not far from this one. It's 85%. So, I mean, the second one, I think, again, when it first came out, I think people were kind of disappointed with it. Critics, too. I think people were a little bit like, oh, that's it? Because they were expecting another version of the first one. But I think the movie has had that, like, lasting power. I'll never forget when like Lindsay Ellis did a whole video about it. And I remember that like sparked a whole, like, it's good, actually. It's really good. That I was really happy to see because I felt like I was sort of, a voice in the wilderness on Volume 2. But I think that movie has sort of rehabilitated itself. I don't know if Volume 3 will, because I don't think it's as, I don't think it has that secret sauce that the second one has. But yeah, I think the consensus will probably stay pretty consistent for this one.
And man, that weirdly kind of mirrors like what happened with Empire Strikes Back. Like, I mean, obviously when that movie came out, like I think the reception was probably strong, but I do remember like hearing that people would be like, oh, it's darker than the first one. It's not quite as like fun and flighty. And then obviously people have gone on to say like, oh, that's the best Star Wars movie, or that's the best of that trilogy at least. And I feel like, I do think these three movies are going to age better than most of the other MCU movies. I can definitely see that being the case with the first two Guardians movies. And I feel like that's probably going to be the case with this one as well. But we don't know for sure. We'll have to wait to see if that's the case.
For audience score, we have 5,000 plus verified ratings. What do you think audiences are at with this?
Probably higher than critics, but I don't know if it's like overwhelmingly so. I'm going to say 89%.
It is higher. It's in the 90s. So I'll give you another chance. So between 90 and 99 for audience score. What do you think?
94?
Again, you're just one off. 95%. I give you so many chances. I give you all the clues. Yeah, which is higher than the second one, which of course has way more ratings at this point. So we can't really.
Sure.
The second one is at 87% comfortably. First one's at 92% comfortably. And I think it'll probably be in between those over the course of its verified ratings. For Cinema Score, I don't know what it is, but you got spoiled on the Cinema Score. So you get to quiz me on this one. Yeah,
I'm curious if you'll guess this one. What did you think those kooks in Las Vegas thought about this movie?
I'm going to be in Vegas next week, so maybe I'll try to find. It'll be my first time in Vegas. Maybe I'll try to find a Cinema Score.
Please go to a Cinema Score screening. I'm so curious to hear what it's like.
I don't know if I'll be able to swing that, but for Cinema Score, based on where the audience score is now, I think a lot of the criticism and the negativity I'm seeing isn't from fans. It isn't from like everyday moviegoers. I'm seeing it coming from critics who are just sort of like have their knives out from Marvel, honestly. And for whatever reason, I don't think that that's wrong necessarily. If you're done with this franchise and you just don't want anymore, but you feel like I still have to review it because it's the big thing. I think audiences, though, are going to be really satisfied with this because I think this movie really wins in the end, despite that boom, boom finale. I think that like where it ends is really, really strong. So I think it's either an A- or an A, personally. I don't think it's an A+. So I'll split the difference. It's A.
You are exactly correct. It is an A.
I think that high audience score kind of gives it, but I think it satisfies. I mean, I know it's a little long, 2.5 hours, but I think people are just kind of used to that from Marvel. Like, I don't know if that's the biggest, factor anymore.
Sure. I think it does help that this feels like conclusive. Like it does feel more emotionally like satisfying than some of the other recent Marvel movies outside of, I guess, No Way Home for other people.
All right. For Letterboxd, it's your turn. We have 235,000 watches. All right. So for the average rating, what do you think?
I mean, I think this is subject to go down, but I think for the initial opening weekend, it's probably going to be pretty high. I'm going to say right now it's probably like 3.8. It
is higher. How much higher? I'll let you decide.
Is it like 4.2 or something?
It's exactly 4.2.
Oh, wow,
you got it in the end. Nice. Yeah, it's exactly 4.2. That's one of the highest I think we've seen in a minute. One of the highest we've ever seen, actually. I don't know if we've ever seen above 4.2. It's actually, I didn't want to give it away, but this is in the top 250 for Letterboxd. It has the golden crown.
I heard about that. People were getting a little mad about that.
That's funny. It's number 179. I can't imagine, like, Will Ashton, help me out. Like, if I ever get mad about the Letterboxd 250, please call me out immediatally.
Sure.
I'm looking.
Yeah.
Even Isaac Feldberg gave this 3 stars. I mean, that's how you know this thing's going to win.
I mean, I think it also helps that obviously we talk about a lot. The average Letterboxd user is probably younger than us, and just young in general. And I think they probably, even more so than us, grew up with this franchise. And it might even be for some people their Star Wars, considering how they may or may not feel about the new Star Wars trilogy. So I feel like the fact that it is generally perceived as like a good movie, and not even by like Marvel terms, just like general, like this feels like a good conclusion to the trilogy. Even so far as I've heard some people be like, is this the best superhero trilogy? And I'm not quite there. I don't think it's that. But if they are responding that sincerely and that emotionally to this, I could definitely see them really, bombarding Letterboxd with like 4.5 and 5 ratings.
It's just way too soon. But yeah, I mean, almost all friends of the show Like this one, gave it at least 3 stars. A lot of people gave it 4. That's the most common one I'm seeing. Kemp Myers gave it 4. Aaron Dicer, friend of the show, gave it 4. Charlie Ridgely gave it 4.5. Yeah, I mean, our community loves it. Ryan Oliver gave it 3.5. Corey Woodruff didn't give it his heart or a rating, but I mean, I'm looking at his review right here, and I think that it seems like he liked it quite a bit. Man of the Jedi gave it 4 stars. The only friend of the show who gave it a very low rating was Chris Evangelista.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know he did not like it.
He did not like it. And it's not too surprising because I think, Chris, I think the animal cruelty stuff, I think probably really rubbed him the wrong way. And I honestly don't blame him.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well.
Yeah. He said it was cruel, unfunny, and full of cheap, hacky stabs and emotion. I love the first 2 movies. This is a pale imitation. So, yeah, sad he didn't like it. But
didn't agree with him there. But yeah, I don't know.
What are you going to do? I mean, it's one of the few outliers in our circle. Clint Worthington, 3.5. Matt Donato, 4 stars. Yeah, I mean, it's overwhelming otherwise. Okay. That'll do it for us this week on Cinemaholics. Will Ashton, what are we talking about next week? I haven't even looked at the release schedule in a minute.
It's a good question because it's a pretty light week as far as like there's no big tempo release. Everyone's trying to stay out of Guardian's way. But there's Hypnotic, the Robert Rodriguez, Ben Affleck collaboration, which is probably going to be our pick if I had to guess.
Do I have to watch that? I edited. So Michael Overholtz, our co-host on Mad Men, he watched the movie and gave it a blistering review. Blistering. And so I feel like I do not want to watch it based on what I read there. Now, it does look interestingly bad, to be fair.
You know me. I'm always going to support Benny. And I like Robert Rodriguez. I'm always happy to kind of check out whatever he's going to do. So that's probably the one I'm most intrigued by. But there's also...
there's Blackberry.
There's Blackberry and there's Fool's Paradise. It's a big weekend for Always Sunny guys. If you want to do a double feature of that, I'd be gung-ho to do that.
I think one of the other options could be Still, a Michael J. Fox movie. That's going to be on, I think, Apple TV Plus on the 12th, if I'm not mistaken.
There is also a movie I have seen.
Yes.
A movie I don't know if you're going to see.
I'm not.
But it's called Book Club, The Next Chapter.
Yeah, that's the one.
You can see
you
that
have
one
a mini
if you
review
wish.
on that if you're so inclined.
Yeah. I'll be writing my review today and sending it to you sometime today, so you can look forward to that.
I already am.
I don't know. I mean, what are you leaning towards? I feel like Hypnotic's a choice, but I feel like you're not agreeing with me.
I'm just not that interested in it based on what I know about it. I'm more interested in Blackberry.
I'm fine with that.
Blackberry.
If you want to do Blackberry, I'm fine with that. I would just suggest also doing Fool's Paradise, so it'd be a fun Always Sunny double feature.
Fair enough. Yeah, because I should be able to see Blackberry on Thursday, and so I could we have John Winkler reviewing it for us at In Between Drafts, and I want to make sure that I can edit his review with all the gumption that I personally have.
Sure.
As for Fool's Paradise, let me double check that that's even playing in the Bay Area.
If it's playing towards me,
it is.
I was going to say, if it's playing towards me, it has to be playing towards you.
I am not uninterested in Fool's Paradise, to be clear. I'm just being funny. But I'm open to a double feature for those movies.
I know you're not as into Always Sunny as I am, and that's not to say I'm like, watching it all the time. I haven't even kept up with the last couple seasons of Always Sunny, but I just think it's cool that they both have big movies coming out this weekend.
All right, well, that'll do it for us this week on Cinemaholics. If you'd like to email us, hit us up about the show, cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com is how you do that. Or come on over to our Discord server. We have a Discord on the In Between Drafts Discord that you can check out. And we have a Cinemaholics channel. If you want to keep up with us and all things in between. But yeah, we'll see you all later. From the Internet California, I'm John Negroni.
And from the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
See you next time.
That happened.